You're listening to the Cliff Notes Podcast, a fan podcast dedicated to the Twilight Saga fan podcast. This is our reaction to Cliff Ravenscraft's reaction to the Twilight series, chapter by chapter. Listen as we see it through Cliff's eyes.
Episode of Cliff Notes. We have recently become aware of vampire cults cropping up everywhere. We don't understand what they're all about, but Cliff informed us that they are disturbing and that they're trying to suck up young people into their covens. And if you read the Twilight books or you listen to these podcasts and you're a minor, you're an underage person, you might accidentally get involved in a vampire cult. Be warned. How's that?
That's great. Well, before I get into my apology, which I do have to make, I just want to say, if you have not read up to chapter 12 of the Twilight book, and if you have not listened to episode 3 of the Twilight Saga fan podcast, do not listen to this episode. It's filled with spoilers. It's filled with information that you haven't heard, and it's going to probably just ruin your experience of listening to that content on your own. So go ahead and listen to that first before you listen to episode 3 of Cliff Notes, because we are going to be going in some serious details on episode 3 of Twilight Saga fan podcast. And before we get started, I have to make an apology, and I feel horrible for what I did. What I did was, in the last episode, I doubted Cliff. I said that chapter 13 was not Confessions. I said that was chapter 11 in Twilight. And I made a big deal about it. I said that Cliff wasn't to be trusted. And I actually, after that episode, I went and I opened up my Twilight book and I looked at chapter 11 and it wasn't called Confessions. Then I switched to chapter 13 and it was called Confessions. And I just sank into myself with just deep remorse. I am so sorry to Cliff and his family for doubting him. And I apologize to the listeners. If anybody believed me, I just feel I'm embarrassed.
Well, you're forgetting another apology that you could be making to me, because I told you in that episode that it actually was chapter 13. I brought it up and you said no, it's not true. So you're forgetting last apology.
I'm really, truly, Kim, I am so sorry. I cannot even begin to explain to you how sorry I am. I have lost sleep over this.
And we might even lose some fans, so I hope you feel good about that.
I don't. I really, truly do. I can't even describe how horrible I feel. Well,
this comes back to a quote that I like to open up this episode with. Actually, it's two quotes. One is an Edward quote, and then one is a Cliff quote. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin. And the Edward quote is, "I don't want to be a monster." And that resonated with me, and I thought it might resonate with Cliff. And the second quote is a Cliff quote. And this is in the episode that we are reviewing. Both these quotes are. He says, "Stay away from this guy. He's dangerous." And then he says, "But you don't know how I feel when I'm around him. He's never really hurt me." And that's a quote that Cliff said that made my skin crawl.
Wow. And you know what? Maybe I am a monster for doubting him and doubting you and doubting the fans. And I apologize. And I hope that I didn't ruin anybody's day when it was just false information that I was just throwing out there. And I can guarantee it will not happen again.
It's okay. And I've forgiven you, and the fans have also forgiven you.
Well, honestly, there's a subreddit now about my faux pas, and I'm embarrassed about that. I'm hoping that all of you that are listening and that have posted on that subreddit will delete your posts, because I I don't feel good about what I did.
Yeah, let's lose the subreddit, guys. Come on. Lose the subreddit. Come on.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. And with that, I think we should start our reaction to episode 3 of the Twilight Saga fan podcast.
And this episode covers chapters 8 through 12, but we are going to be jumping around a lot in this episode, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, some of the stuff that went down in this episode was appalling. Like, the first thing that I want to talk about is a thing that was mentioned in the last moment of the episode. And they mentioned that Steph Meyer, when she wrote the book, they accuse her of drinking cough syrup to fall asleep, I believe. And so in honor of that accusation, I've decided to drink about as much cough syrup as I believe that she drank when writing these books.
Now, don't quote me here. I don't want any subreddits going on, but I have to say, I think I disagree with you. I think what they were talking about was Bella took some cough syrup so that she could fall asleep because she was really excited about seeing Edward. I don't think Stephanie Meyer, or do you want to share the nickname that we've been calling her to our fans? Because I think it's kind of a fun nickname that we've been referring to her as.
Yeah, she's Queen Bee to us. Because
to us, if you were to read our text message thread, we talk about Queen Bee all the time. We refer to Stephanie Meyer as Queen Bee.
Yeah, she's Queen Bee to us because she is the queen of all this. She started these books. She started all these fan fictions about her and her books, like the Twilight Saga podcast and Cliff Notes.
Well, yes. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have Cliff Notes, and we wouldn't even be here talking about this. So
we can thank her for all her royal jelly that she's sprayed on all of our artwork and our podcasts.
She's an inspiration to our podcast, but so is Cliff.
Correct.
Yeah, so we call her Queen Bee. It's kind of a little inside joke between us, but we're willing to share that with all of you guys because we think that we should all be in on it. We should all be calling her Queen Bee because she's the Queen Bee. But anyways, let's get back to what I was saying. I was saying that I don't think that Cliff and Stephanie were talking about Stephanie Myers here. I think they were referring to Bella because in that chapter, she does take some cough syrup in order to fall asleep.
Like many of the fans who listen to this podcast, I have a lot of things going on. It's hard for me to get the time to listen to even one episode of the Twilight Saga podcast, even though I enjoy it. I'm a very busy guy. And so I must have misunderstood that. But still, what's done is done. I've drank the stuff. I've drank the purple stuff. So here we are. I mean, we'll get through it either way.
Well, that's an interesting ode to Stephanie Meyer's sort of portrayal of Bella, I guess. We'll see how that we'll see where that takes some of your ideas about what Cliff and Stephanie had to say about these chapters.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll spark my creativity a little bit, and I'm continuing to sip on it as we speak.
Yeah, I would say keep sipping, and I hope that it will, give you some more creativity in the way that you're analyzing what Cliff is saying. Because what we're about seeing the world through Cliff's eyes, and specifically seeing Twilight through Cliff's eyes. So maybe if you drink that cough syrup, you will channel a little bit of Cliff's energy. Chapter 8. So let's start out with Chapter 8. Poor Angelus. So Cliff says that he had to read it several times because his mind was wandering elsewhere. And that really makes me wonder why his mind is wandering. This chapter is about a girl's night out. And Bella is taking this girl's night out so that she can get her mind off of Edward, this sexy bloodsucker that's consumed all of her mind.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing that it would be a chapter that he has a hard time keeping his mind on when it's all about Bella trying to take her mind off of something.
Yeah, I thought about that too.
I actually think that was a joke that Cliff was making. I think that was an ode to this chapter. And I think he said that he was walking, exercising and going for runs and things like that. And he just couldn't be distracted with something like a podcast when he was, he's working so hard on himself.
So not a podcast. We don't send us any emails. He meant to say audiobook.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, that's okay. So I honestly, I laughed a little bit when I heard Cliff say that. I thought maybe he was trying to make a joke too, maybe kind of like a subliminal message. I did think that through. But yeah, Cliff also says that he's frustrated that the book and movie are inconsistent. There's a lot of inconsistencies, and one of them is in the movie she is seeking out a bookstore, but in the book she stumbles upon one. It's kind of spooky. She doesn't go in, and then she goes into a different one, and that was more of what happened in the book. So he wishes that it was more accurate towards the book. He wanted her stumbling around, just looking around and getting lost and just wandering. He wanted more of that.
That wasn't the first time that they had mentioned inconsistencies between the book and the movie, and it's maybe the 11th, or maybe, I don't know, but they've mentioned this quite a few times, and it's not a coincidence. I think that they're mentioning it this many times because they are in fact working on a better movie.
I didn't even think about that, but if they were, that would be absolutely mind-blowing.
Why would you just mention these inconsistencies so many times if you weren't working on a better movie that was closer to the book like you want? I think that they got it in the works, and in the next couple of years you're going to see a trailer. In fact, was that your dog in the background?
Yeah.
That's a lot like this episode where the school called.
Yeah, I apologize.
There was a phone call in this episode of the Twilight Saga podcast. It was the school calling, asking that they pick up their daughter. And they said, nope, can't pick her up yet. We have to finish this podcast. And that happened at the beginning of the episode, a lot like this. And you can go and listen to that.
That did happen, and I did make a note of it. I was going to make a point about the movie thing. If you scroll up in the Twilight Saga fan podcast, you don't have to listen to these episodes yet. Listen to them before we review them, but you'll see that they do a full review on the movie, on each of the movies. They do a full review. And they're also really incorporating more reviews in the reviews of the book. So they're very movie focused, and I think that's a great theory. And now that you say that, I'm kind of getting excited and hoping that maybe they'll finally cast Michael as Edward, because I thought that he would have made a great Edward. So Bella runs into some rough folks, as Cliff puts it. And this is a quote from Cliff. He says that the rough folks were chuckling and had some other things in mind. And I think we all know what he means by that. He's a moral man. He's not going to come out and say it, but they were chuckling and they had some things in mind that they weren't savory things.
Yeah, we're not going to say it on this podcast, but it's things that are unsavory and you don't want to be involved in.
No, absolutely not. And actually, Cliff says while he was listening to this part of the book, he was walking through the dark neighborhood at night, and he was getting a little bit scared himself. He was really thinking about what it would be like if he were being chuckled at by a group of rough-looking men.
Yeah, he seems to almost relish the idea of being a young woman about to be pounced upon. Mm-hmm. He really likes the idea of being a 17-year-old lady out on the town.
I got that vibe as well. And this is actually the point in the podcast where they had to pause because the school called. So it was right after he was talking about how he was really enjoying feeling like that young Bella Swan being chuckled at. And then the school calls. Then there's a little pause in the episode. They didn't cut it out. They just paused it for a second. And that's when they put a little bit of music in there, because he is a musical guy. They put a little music in, and it's kind of like a smooth transition into the next subject.
Yeah, but they weren't able to go pick her up at the time. They couldn't. No. They kept powering through. And
we're thankful for that, because the next part of this podcast gets very interesting.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, Cliff is disturbed that Edward is freaky, if you will. And that's a quote. Mm-hmm. He goes on to kind of compare this to when his sister was dating a guy, or wanted to date a guy who was actually, and this is the part we were warning you about in the beginning. If you do have children listening, remove them from the room. This is disturbing. This is very disturbing. And it's kind of the the kind of thing that puts shivers down your spine.
Yeah, this is real nasty stuff.
And it's honestly most likely illegal. So if you keep listening, just be aware that this is going to probably disturb you.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing you'd see on Dateline, and you would say,
Yeah.
"I can't believe that's happening anywhere, let alone in the home of a person like Cliff."
Yeah. Well, what we're about to say is that Cliff's sister was interested in dating a guy in a vampire cult, which I have a hard time even saying that. It's just those words just really rub me the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephanie knew more about it than he did. She says that she went to school with his sister, which obviously Cliff didn't go to school because he was doing those adventures in that RV, but Stephanie actually was in school with his sister, and she says that they never dated, but she really wanted to date him. And she knew a lot about Cliff's sister, more than Cliff knew, which I found, interesting.
But the vampire cult is really something that you don't expect. And he brought this up because, he was disturbed that young women who are reading these books, that these women might be involved with a guy who is maybe a vampire on the side, involved with some vampire activity, and then, they become infatuated with that interest, and that they end up getting their blood sucked.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And he says, and this is something that he said he's worried about all the young ladies around the world who are dating mysterious men whose dads have already warned them not to keep talking to them, but they don't listen to their dads. And Cliff, that concerns him. As a father, that concerns him. And he wishes that these young women would listen to their dads more.
Yeah, and not lie to them, and not lie to their
God.
dads. That's something that also disturbed him in this episode. Some lying. Bella decided to go and lie to her father. What were they thinking putting that in the book when Cliff is going to read this? He was not happy with that. I don't know what they were thinking putting that in there.
No, I think when he makes his movie, if he does make a movie, he's going to take that out of the movie because he knows that it shouldn't even be part of the story. And he's right.
He's also right that the lie wasn't even necessary. She could have just said, "Oh, hey, I got a ride home from Edward. He was in the area," which is all true.
And back to what we were saying about he's worried about these young women.
Uh-huh.
They're reading Twilight and they're thinking about it from their own point of view, and they're thinking, what if I meet this mysterious kind of guy? Well, he paints a very, very vivid picture. He paints a very vivid picture of the kind of man that he would be concerned about. And he says that this is a guy who's been in jail a few times and who is hitting his girlfriend. And she kind of brushes it off. And he says that this is just like Edward. This concerns him.
Yeah, he's trying to show us that doesn't really happen in real life. You meet a guy like this, he's gonna beat the crap out of you. I hate to say it.
Yeah.
He's gonna beat if a guy pulls up in a Volvo and he says, "Get in my car," like the way that Edward said it, he's not saying that because he likes your dress. He's saying that because he wants to see the dress off of you.
Oh my God, absolutely. But I will say Stephanie, she disagrees with him. She says, and this is a quote from Stephanie, my first quote that I've ever done of Stephanie. She says, "You're going too far with that comparison." So she says, "You're going too far." And I don't know. I don't know. In the real world, what would a bloodsucker look like? It wouldn't be pretty. And I hope it wouldn't be anything like these cults that we're hearing about that his sister was involved with.
Yeah, a bloodsucker in real life, it wouldn't be in the form of a guy who looks like Edward with the sparkling skin and the beautiful smile, who makes the waitress have a little drool over your dessert. It's the kind of guy that wears the trench coat with the chains coming off of it, and he's wearing all black, and he's got the pale skin, and he looks very sick, and he goes to high school with your daughter.
That's exactly. Actually, I think now I didn't write that down, but that sounds a lot like how Cliff was describing these characters that were in school with his sister. I remember him saying that the chains and the trench coat. Did you? Was that a direct quote?
No, there was a little fabrication there.
And I thought that was interesting that you noticed the waitress, because I Cliff really loved that part when the waitress was drooling over Edward and he didn't even notice. He kind of compared that to his own experiences when he's gone to a restaurant.
What chapter was that in Twilight?
Well, honestly, after chapter 8, which was the first one that they covered, I don't recall them ever like bringing up any chapter names. I think it just kind of petered off.
No, not true. There is a chapter called Complications.
Oh, was that chapter 9 or chapter 10 maybe? Maybe it was chapter 10.
There's a chapter called Complications, and this confuses Cliff. He says something about the name of this chapter, which is why I wanted to bring this up. He says, Complications? Is there another chapter called Another Complications? And this might be the cough syrup talking, but when I heard that, I said, is there a secret chapter in Twilight called Another Complications? It's another chapter that might be a parallel to this chapter. And so I loved that idea so much. I loved the idea of a hidden chapter in Twilight, that the name of this episode is going to be called Another Complications.
I love it, and I actually thought about that too when I first heard it, but I thought of it in a different way. I thought that maybe Cliff was doing a little parody on the book, and I thought that was maybe his way of hinting that he was writing an extra chapter in the book.
Oh, so either way, there is a secret chapter. Either it's written by him or written by Queen Bee.
Well, if the Queen had written a secret chapter, I think that we would have known. It's possible that she only shared that information with Cliff, but I highly doubt it. I think somebody would have leaked it on the internet. I think that Cliff is actually working on that right now, and I think that was sort of like a hint, sort of him alluding to the fact that he is going to be releasing that hopefully in the next week or so.
We'll keep a keen eye online looking for this content.
That would be amazing. I would love to see some of his writing and compare it to Queen Bee.
Yeah. Well, before we end this episode, there's one more thing that I'd like to talk about. I don't know if you do, but there's one thing I want to talk about, and that's there's a theme to this episode, and it's not just complications. The theme is passion, and it's an all-consuming passion that you could have for a bloodsucker, or bloodsucker could have for you. And this brought up a lot of feelings for Cliff and Steph. You could hear kind of a chemistry that was going on in between those two when they were discussing it. They were talking about how the waitress at the table who was obsessed with Edward, that made Cliff have a sensation in his body where he said, oh, I remember a time when I was like that. When I would ignore a waitress who was drooling over my pancakes, and I was looking at you, Steph, and that was when I was in love with you.
That really warmed my heart when I heard him say that, and it kind of, I really could picture it. I could really picture him sitting at that table with a plate of pancakes in front of him and that waitress just drooling over him. I could really see that.
It
made me smile.
It brought me back to a time in my life when Cliff, or in whoever's life, when Cliff and Steph were truly in love and they had a passion for each other. And watching them read this book together is like watching two snakes wrap around each other, while they're listening to an audiobook, and watching them really kind of just curl up tight. And I just really enjoy it.
That's so beautiful, and I couldn't agree more. I think that this podcast is not only a way for Cliff to share how he sees Twilight through his eyes, but it's also a way for him to rekindle that romance with Stephanie, and just kind of, it just brings the whole story full circle. He says he wasn't interested in the romantic relationship between Bella and Edward, but he's clearly interested in a romantic relationship with his wife, and I think that the story that he's reading and he's perceiving through his eyes is really going to spark some more love between them.
Okay,
absolutely.
Well, is there anything else that you want to discuss?
Nope, that was all the Cliff Notes that I had. The episode just sort of, they didn't really review all the chapters they said they were going to review, but I didn't care. I was at the edge of my seat just listening to this episode.
Yeah, and I don't know which chapters they're going to be reviewing in the next episode of the Twilight Saga podcast, but I do know that it really just comes down to what Cliff gets done in time. He has a hard time paying attention, folks, but the episode the chapter rather that he gets to is the chapter that they review up to. So let's hope that he gets to a decent point in the book.
I agree. I can't wait to review episode 4 with you. We will be back with our episode 4, reviewing their episode 4 next time.
Okay, and I cannot wait to review their episode 4 with you too. Good night.
Good night.